Welcome to Season 8 of the Charity Matters podcast. I'm Heidi Johnson, nonprofit founder, lifelong helper, and your host. I've been interviewing modern-day heroes for over a decade with my blog, and I'm so excited to be sharing these inspiring conversations on our podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern-day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. What do you think some of the world's top athletes have in common with a group of students? Today's guest is the person who made that happen. Kirk Spahn is the founder of the ICL Foundation, which is to inspire and educate and promote civic leadership. And he has brought together some of the world's top athletes, celebrities, and using them to inspire our youth to give back and to change the world. I'm so excited to share his inspiring conversation about how he's making a difference and teaching thousands of students to do just the same. You're not going to want to miss this. I'm so excited to have Kirk Spahn joining us here today from the ICL Foundation. Welcome, Kirk. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you so much. This is exciting for me, especially gearing up for the holiday times. Hope everyone had a great, productive, festive, and excellent holidays.
Yeah, it's a season of giving. It's kind of our time of year. So before we kind of get into everything and the backstory and all the really meat of things, why don't you tell our audience what ICL Foundation stands for and
Sure.
what it is that you do?
Sure. So the ICL Foundation stands for the Institute for Civic Leadership. And the word civic had sort of become almost an antiquated, somewhat dirty word. Like, people think of civics class like sawing something. And yet when you break down what civic leadership is and the true definition, it's building a prosperous community. It's about helping others. And it's something that, I'd felt had been lost for a long time. And now so more than ever, I think coming back to the roots of civic engagement and civic leadership is, I believe should be a pillar and a cornerstone of all education, of all youth. So that's why the Institute for Civic Leadership was created over 2 decades ago.
It's fantastic. So you don't just wake up and start a nonprofit. There's a lot of things that happen to unpack the journey. And I have been interviewing nonprofit founders for 14 years. I've interviewed thousands of them. And not one person when they were little said, when I grow up, I want to be a nonprofit founder. Not one, at least not yet. And I'm trying. The more I tell your stories, I'm hoping I'm going to change that. But there's things that happen along the way. So let's just start with kind of your earliest experiences, role models with volunteering, philanthropy, being civic, helping others. Was it something you grew up with or that you saw in your life? Or where do you think this early seeds began?
100%. It was basically from birth. I was born into a family of educators, and from the earliest memories, when it was explained from when I could talk, I was like, "Oh, so my parents are teachers?" I said, "No, we run schools." And there was always a distinctive twist. My father used to always say that when you support the next generation, you're building the leaders of tomorrow. My grandfather coined an expression that still I use all the time, which is finding the spark of genius in every child. That our job as educators was always to find what people are passionate about and
Right.
sort of help support that, and then make sure that there was always a purpose to it of giving back. So I think at the same time, my mother was always running NGOs. So my entire life was always about giving to the community, and that was her entire essence, was just about selflessness and giving to others. And there was a reason that she was sort of beloved by all of my friends, and people always looked to her as a role model, and I think that just sort of seeped in when it's osmosis in a lot of ways. I never said I wanted to run a school or found a nonprofit, but from very, very, very early, it was what what is success in life is
Right.
what you can do to help people. So I think it was ingrained. I had no idea when, how, why, where, or
It
what.
sounds like you won the parent lottery in my book, but that sounds pretty fantastic because a lot of people don't even know how to start, where to start. They didn't grow up with that, and I grew up with that as well, in a little bit different way, but similar. And it's all you know, right? It's like you brush your teeth. You just don't think, of course you're going to do that, and of course you're going to help somebody. But a lot of people don't always they didn't have that framework that you had or that I had. So there's typically in most nonprofit founders stories, not always, but typically there's a catalyst. There's a moment in the story that all of a sudden you're on one path and something happens, change of scenery and change of life, change of script. So I'm going to take a
Absolutely.
gander that you have one of these stories, and I would love to. We would love to hear it.
Without a doubt. When I grew up, I was always very goal oriented, purpose driven, and as a top performing youth athlete, everything was always sort of in the basis of sports, like rankings up, sort of always
Right.
setting goals. And growing up in New York City was also an incredible, all the stereotypes are true. It was a melting pot. I mean, my friends came from every walk of life. My mother was managing an NGO that was global. So travel was a big part of my life. And just more than travel, when I mixed that with sports, I had the opportunity as a tennis player to live, not just travel and as a tourist, but to live in other countries from a very early age. So living in India, in
So
Europe, in
cool.
South America. And and really what I always noticed was how similar interest youth had, whether it was Hollywood, sports, music. There were so many connecting pieces. And I didn't think much about it, but it was always you gravitate towards people with similar interests.
Right.
You really learn when you're living in another
Yeah,
society, you
in the
see
right,
how
when you're removed
similar
from your
they are.
comfort zone, right?
Totally. And so I was living my life, and ironically, I was the maybe somewhat petulant child that said, I have no desire to do what my family does. I dreamt in later in life that at NGO and with the UN or doing something international was always on the cards. And but my father side, he ran a school. I had no desire to be the principal of a school.
Right.
And so I took a very different route. My father said that after I graduated college, try to play your sport. If you can become a professional, great, but look at the next couple of years as your survey course and create experiences that you think will lead you to find what that is. And so
Great advice.
I was in the strangest place when that catalyst for starting the ICL happened. I was working at a record label, and I have no musical talents, but I love music. I was working for Clive Davis,
Oh, wow.
and we had had a lot of meetings with Tom Freston, who was the founder of MTV Networks,
Mhm.
and he was running VH1. And by chance, I happened to be living in New York on my own with two NFL linebackers for the New York Giants. And it was
Okay. I hope it
odd.
was a big apartment.
It was the oddest thing. It was so bizarre. And when I look back now, 20 plus years later, people are like, how did it happen? I have no idea. Some people refer to me, my wife sometimes calls me Forrest Gump, where I can go anywhere in the world and sort of know people or find connections. And, unfortunately, the sad catalyst for ICL was actually the tragedy of September 11th. I was in New York working a record label. My best friend at the time, ironically, happened to be from Saudi Arabia. And I was living with these NFL players. And he, after September 11th, people wanted to do something. Like, really, like, there was a movement of like, what can we do? And
Right.
it just seemed that working, promoting young artists at a record label didn't have a calling. It didn't grab me. It was what can we do? Because I had ironically spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I'd been all over the world. I was living with people that had a platform. These athletes,
Right.
were known, and I was in these meetings with, and this is before the days of social network and influencers, but these artists were
I remember those days.
big time celebrities, and
Right.
I was the lowest on the totem pole. But I was in a meeting, and I said, what can these artists do? There was ideas of big concerts for giving, there were blood drives, but really after September 11th, it was um, people were scared. There was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of fear-driven ideology, and not a lot of facts, and schools didn't really know how to respond. And that idea of the Institute for Civic Leadership had been brewing because it had been started. The ICL nonprofit was sort of put together by um, a cooperation between a school and a church in a sort of downtrodden area, but without a real purpose. And I met with my father and a reverend, and I brought in these people from Saudi and some of the Tom Freston, and we had a roundtable and said, how can we get youth engaged? And everyone looked around, and there was only one youth. I was 23 years old. And they said, well, Kirk, what do you think? And I said, I've seen the power of celebrity, and I live with two well-known linebackers on a New York team, but nobody knows what their journey was. No one saw the work they put in. It was very
Right.
much a time where MTV was talking about cribs and the cars and
Oh,
money
yeah,
and
yeah.
and the results. And so we all said that it's all about the journey. And I had worked very, only for a little while on the record label, but I couldn't believe how hard these singers worked. I mean, they were up at 6. They would go do media, then they would do sound checks, and they would perform, then they'd get on a bus and they go somewhere else. But yet
Right.
the public
The
just
thing you
sees
never
like
see, right? The
the
thing
things
everyone
that
just right, you never see. You just see a finished product, you never see anything that goes into it. You see a
100%.
tennis player, you don't see all the hours of practice, right? You
Well,
see
I will always remember. I mean, one of the funnier things later was Adele won Best New Artist, and she started chuckling, and she's like, "I've been touring for 12 years. I have like 6 albums. Like, thanks for
right,
thanks for the Best
right?
New Artist. The
I'm
overnight
new, right?
success. Every
Right,
overnight success is 10 or 20 years in the making. So that was similar, and really the idea that I had with some incredible support. When you have the founder of MTV's support, and you
right.
have, a force like Clive Davis, and then
Doors begin to open.
exactly. And the idea was, why don't we put together a conference on Martin Luther King Day, and we'll call it the Dare to Dream Conference. It'll be, supported by MTV. It'll be at the Museum of Natural History, where my mother was a board member of, and it was incredible. The museum said, that sounds great. And because we were in education, we had a directory of thousands of schools, and we said, we'll
Fantastic.
put on a free event. And the goal was just to share the journey of these celebrities, but more so, that would be in the morning. In the afternoon, we would connect sort of public school kids with private school, with parochial kids that have never met other than in competition, maybe on a
Right,
basketball court. But to really show the common themes of sort of oneness of what we can do, as that youth can make an impact, and helping them find a passion and a purpose. Because the big words for us was always passion and purpose to help build a better world. And it has to be something that
right.
comes from within. So that we had a 2000 and January 17th, 2002 was the inaugural Dare to Dream conference. Originally, the Institute for Civic Leadership was just about doing conferences, bring people together, and then help link them with organizations that they could really make an impact. The idea was, in for high school age kids, how to make community service count, how to build the bridge between just, oh, I have to do 150 hours of service, into, wow, I'm really passionate about this cause. How can I get really, more involved. And
Right.
that was the ignition.
Right.
I thought it was a one and done. There was nothing.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So, I mean, starting anytime you start something, it's fun. We all love starting something. I mean, Huck Finn liked when he started to paint the fence. I mean, everyone thinks it's fun when you start, but starting is one thing. All of a sudden, things get real and there's challenges. So, talk to me about you go from this fantastic event that the energy is off the reservation. I can only imagine with the 9/11 kind of wind behind you and the spirit of the country at the time. But then when things get real, like, talk to me about some of this and you're 23. I mean, Kirk, you're a baby. My youngest son is 23. So to think about who he is at that time, I mean, who he is now, and being as young as you were, worldly or not, it's a lot, right? So what were some of the challenges?
So looking back, the number one strength before a challenge was that I was 23. Because I actually had a cockiness that was like, why would this brand new elected mayor named Mike Bloomberg not want to show up? Like, why would you ever not show up? I mean, you know, like why would this young artist Alicia Keys or Wyclef, like why would they not want to come on this important day? But I know now, I mean, that was by far the greatest strength because today, at more than double
Right,
the age of when I did that,
right.
I would look at someone and go, good luck, like have fun. Bye. I'll be rooting for you.
Well, the beauty is we don't know what we're doing when we do it. I mean, when I started a nonprofit, there's now a book called Nonprofit for Dummies. And the nonprofit I started is not the one that I run, but um, ignorance is a gift in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, right? Because
huge, huge.
you don't know what you don't know, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, it's beyond a marathon. It's like it's a decathlon. It's like different Olympic sports. It is never,
And
it
it's
is
always
never
exhausting.
it is never the business plan. Is not what you set out to do. And that's really where it's funny looking back at the transformation and metamorphosis of the ICL Foundation. And yet the spark, the mission stayed the same. It just the process, the everything evolved, some in good ways, you try stuff. So
Well,
that
when you're
was
doing good work, I mean, when you're on the right path, doors just open, and it's the way of the universe or whatever you believe to keep saying go, 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 go. When it closes and you hit the challenge, you're like,
Mhm.
maybe I need to turn, maybe I need to go the other way, maybe I'm not sure.
So your question about challenges was really, we were so lucky. Looking back now, like CNN covered us. We had all like stations, and we got
Wow.
invited to come in, and it was Paul Azan, had never been on TV. Had zero communication training whatsoever. They wanted some of the New York Giants to see what they were doing on Martin Luther King Day. My roommate came on and asked him how he started it, and his response was, "No, no, no, that was Kirk." And they started asking me questions like, "Well, what's next?" And I was like, "I don't know. I just spent like 6 months putting this together. Like, I have no idea what's next." But they started talking about the impact that this was having, and they could see clearly this was needed. And I was just kind of desperate to like find other organizations that needed a boost and support and the pass the
You didn't
torch.
think this was your going to be your
No, no,
journey.
no, 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 not at all. And in fact, ironically, it was actually originally helped to get me into grad school. I invited someone to be a speaker from Columbia, who, there were ulterior motives, and it was to impress my bosses. I mean, there were so
Right.
many things leading into it, but it was kind of going to be a one and done. And it,
Here we are.
there's a funny story that happened when Paul Zahn asked me, well, to be young and passionate, like what's the secret? Like what was it that motivated you? And my response was, well, I'm really passionate about being passionate. And when you're 23 and your fraternity
Right.
brothers at Dartmouth College are listening to you I was the passionate one. I mean, it was just the butt of every joke. Like
I have 3 sons, so I can only imagine.
it
Right, I
was
get it.
absolutely like, oh, Kirk is so but again, over 20 years later, it actually is the kindling, like the ICL Foundation, the academy that we run, everything that came afterwards started with having a passion and how we would turn a passion into a purpose. And then I realized that when kids have passion and they find a purpose and they want to take action, there's a whole load missing in between
Yep.
before how you can have an impact. So we've created the ICL 6 Ps, which is every fellow today goes through, which is taking a passion, making it a purpose, then finding the right process to follow, understanding perseverance, because the hockey stick does not happen, perspective with people. You can never do it alone. So you always gain mentorship, and mentorship was so important in the growth of the ICL, to give you perspective. And then you can look back to ultimately personalize it, because everyone's journey is a personal one, even in big
Right.
organizations. So those 6 Ps, but our mission from day one, from the first t-shirt in 2001, was inspire, educate, impact.
I
And
love that.
those words were always, to this day, what we set out to do. And you can't
So,
inspire.
well, I love the passion. I love the pillars. But I mean, do you think the same thing still fuels you today? Do you think that's what, because, it gets harder. I always say this, people who go into business and they're manufacturing something and they have to make X amount of, widgets at the month's end to make their number or whatever it is. You and I go to bed at night and we think about the kids that didn't get served or the kid that got left behind or the person that wasn't whatever happened. We're carrying a different load on our back. And sometimes it's the greatest gift of our work, but it's also the heaviest part of our work sometimes.
So true.
And so when the days are long and whatever the grant doesn't come through or something falls apart, like what is fueling you today that fueled you then, or is it the same thing?
Mhm. Um, it's the same
Are you
motivation,
still a
but
passion guy?
a lot more. I'm definitely still a passion guy, but the challenges were, looking back, very clear. There's no doubt that the greatest joy was just being with the kids. Like really, I mean, it's so cliched, but like to see you transforming kids' lives forever. And then it may come back. You may not know it at the time, because I'm a parent now as well. Like, kids don't say thank you. They're not like, oh, thanks so much for this opportunity. But the kids that we impacted, it happened fast, and the appreciation was very, we could see the impact. We're an organization that sees impact very quickly. So I think that keeps motivating. The parts I didn't know, the icky days, the challenges, 100%, as most nonprofits will say, comes around funding.
Right.
It is
Right.
not fun to ask other people for money, especially when I'm obsessed with, I can never go toe to toe and say this organization is more important than that organization. I don't believe
Right.
that.
It's a bad business model. Let's
It,
just be
it,
clear.
it,
It's a really bad, I'd like to use a word that I like to use a lot, but I'm not going to, but it's a really messed up business model.
Mhm. I
It
found a
just
solution though. I think I found what I wanted to find, an identity where I wouldn't be in competition ever. So we see ourselves as an organization that is impact driven and can help augment and also be a catalyst to support other organizations. So
so
we,
talk to me about
yeah.
impact because I have a love-hate relationship with that word.
Mhm.
Also running a youth leadership organization, measuring the impact, as you said, like you sometimes you see it instantly, but measuring leadership is not an
Mhm.
easy thing to measure. An
Mhm.
impact, from one person could be a grant is how many hours of community service or whatever your kids are doing. Impact from somebody else could just be a story about something that touched their soul. So how do you measure impact? What does that look like for you?
So impact is really hard to qualify and quantify, and that's been a challenge for 2 decades. What I think is great about ICL is that our fellows that we support, we've created scorecards. So we call them impact reports, because a lot of organizations, when they give money, impact is a big word, but sometimes you miss a grant. They say, oh, this is only for 100 people. We want to touch 10,000.
Right.
Well, it's hard to say, all right, if you fund a conference versus a curriculum versus direct support to individuals, So we like to think of ourselves as a multiplier effect, that when you're helping to fund an ICL fellow or a program that we're doing. So we evolved from conferences into practical. We started getting grants to build in. What we really saw was missing in education was a focus on service leadership, character, which today they refer to as social emotional learning. Like there was no SEL
Right, right,
in the early 2000s, but
right,
we knew and we could show that students that had gone through leadership training, for others, character, self-awareness, becoming kind of their own coaches, where they've tried to start their own nonprofits, have started from an early age, started something that
right,
like 2, 3 years later, they were performing better in school. They had become school leaders. So we could see pretty soon how these kids were having an impact on the rest of their schools. So we started creating now big time award-winning curriculum, and that was the hardest thing to qualify and quantify is social emotional learning, right? It's still a big
it
issue.
still is, right? Yeah,
Character.
I
You can't
struggle
really
with
give
it.
an A, B, or C. And even when you challenge, a lot of it is internal. We do a lot of journaling. And so mentorship became a big part of the ICL. We were very fortunate after that first Dare to Dream conference to be in New York, to have access to celebrities. But I'm a big believer that when those athletes, performers, business leaders, politicians actually take the time off the record, to share their journeys, the same way you're
Right,
asking me to share the ICL journey.
right, right,
When they do that, it sparks something in them and it inspires kids. And just hearing the story and not the end result gets them motivated. And I think
right,
that was missing in traditional schools. You didn't really capture that. The lack of engagement was really clear. And we worked with,
right.
hundreds of schools. And so we at the foundation realized quickly that we were at a time back in the early the No Child Left Behind Act was
Oh,
happening.
yeah, I remember that.
And I would be on panels and I realized that no one can ever say that, helping the lowest level student learn how to read is critical. But what I really took offense to was that at that time they removed all funding from gifted and talented programs. And it's sort of crystallized to me that the ICL's mission was to help those kids that were already showing they were exceptional at something.
Right,
They were the leaders, but they had a glass ceiling. They would be capped at their school. They wouldn't have opportunities. And I said the direction of the ICL Foundation was going to be to have their back, to support those kids. I don't care if it was in sports, music, social service, technology, but kids that had chosen a way to choose a goal to follow and pursue
right,
it relentlessly. And that really became the idea that you promote engagement, application, and mastery, and to support these kids who would then became the leaders of their school, became the leaders of their community, became the models that people wanted to follow. That was the most important sort of step, and that really started to crystallize things. Because if not, without a clear cut, and you probably saw it running a nonprofit, that you had to get, instead of getting wider and wider the mission, you
right.
had to drill it down and drill it down and drill
You've got to
it down.
fine tune. Well, once kids see themselves as a leader, once someone's identified them or they've self-identified themselves as a leader, it's they're off to the races,
But
right?
there are not a lot of people supporting them, and that's what I was shocked about. I would
Right?
have thought there was a lot more support,
Well,
and there
and
really wasn't.
I say this a lot, but in Maslow's higher needs of hierarchy, you don't always, it's always food, health, education, and leadership kind of falls. We're a little lower in the whole list. So I think that I every once in a while when I ran the nonprofit I started provided chaplains of all faiths at a children's hospital, and my
Mhm,
husband would say, "Well, Heidi, anyone can help a children's hospital. Everybody wants to help a sick child."
mhm.
He's like, "We're going to find out if you're really good at what you do when you take on leadership because it's kind of it's something we should all be investing in, right? Of course, but it's not something people think to invest in."
Well, that's right, and it's not. you have to, it takes a little longer, right? You don't have that blink response.
Right.
You think of leadership, you think of they're all set, like they're being taken
Right.
care of.
Right.
And that can be a benefit, but it's also a fault because you look at the people quote in need, or obviously medicine and sick children, like that is paramount. Like there's no way that I want
Right.
to take money away from something like that. But I think when you look at it as, especially people who've been successful, it's like you want to help inspire that, because each person's journey is unique and someone always had a mentor or someone to support them, and
100%.
realizing that
Right.
that's lucky. And if there's an organization that can actually bring that to the masses, and look, timing, luck, everything happens. And the evolution of the Institute for Civic Leadership was technology came in. I mean, things that we started day one, the entire organization mission, we can affect more people now in a day with a click of a button, and get mentors out. We used to have these incredible people would leave our conferences, our workshops, our um, programs, and their lives would be changed. But that was a couple hundred a year. Now you can reach tens of thousands, and
Right.
that's kind of mind blowing. So that actually inspires me more and more and more, is just to be able to reach more people, to see that happen. And that's been the journey that's kind of kept me going.
I love that. So what's the big dream? Because, we all start out thinking, "Oh, we're just gonna help one person, or if we can just do this, or we can just do this one event, or if we can just do this one thing." Every one of us starts out with such a small vision because we just don't realize, and we are our own best and worst enemies because we keep raising our own bar. And you as an athlete, I can imagine raise it a little higher than anybody else because it's just in the DNA of an athlete's brain. Um, I'm married to a nationally ranked triathlete, and I have a son who was a quarterback. So I see the wiring, and that a nonprofit founder is like, whoa. So as you're setting the dreams, I know they're always the goal line's moving constantly. What's the big goal, Kirk?
So it's evolved. I now see it as you need to latch on to something bigger than yourself. So the goal has transformed for, I'll put it in technology terms. The brand, usually people focus on building a brand name. So I
Right.
focus on the ICL being like an Intel chip, that it can be support other organizations. And really my goal is to transform education. um, I learned the hard way that trying to put programs into the public school ether is like a big black hole. It was going back to the challenges. I mean, it was like banging your head against the wall. You have all the data showing how amazing your results are and what these kids are doing. But when you bring it and try to then put it in that rocket ship to go bigger,
Right.
it you land up failing to launch. And,
Right.
and
Right.
it's very discouraging. So what I did was I ended up taking the bull by the horns and actually creating what I call the Willy Wonka golden ticket. The problem with a lot of nonprofits is you're reliant on others, whether it's for money. Um,
Mhm.
there are other organizations, like ways to find it's not all you. And when you are in the education space, especially in
Right.
sort of social emotional learning, um, and you talk about character and service leadership and on social entrepreneurship, everyone nods. They think it's great, but it's a bit amorphous. Like you don't have
Right.
that specific way. And so coming from a background of a family that is running globally recognized private schools, in a weird way, I wanted to almost put our family out of business and say, wow, imagine if all the
Sorry,
schools in
Dad.
the world, yeah, yeah, imagine if all, in a way, right? Imagine if all the schools in the world, like public schools, had character baked in and
Right.
service leadership. So
That'd be
we raised all
amazing.
this money and then we were giving things out for free. And I learned quickly that free was not always the best, that having some skin in the game actually made you have more of an impact. Because,
Value, right?
I
Free
mean,
is means no value sometimes. Yeah.
exactly. So we had to create that value. And so for us, what really changed, again, the Willy Wonka golden ticket was, hey, why don't we just become accredited? Like, why don't I take the background I have in a school and create an incubator? Because all of the programs that we would do with hundreds of kids and we do classes and it was showing great results, but then it just got mixed in to the normal crowd. And
Right.
so I said, why don't we create an accredited school, which is called ICL Academy, and bring them in and all the things we want to do, that we could actually have an R&D lab of, 1,000 students that we were doing their academics, but we were also giving the mentorship. We call it a pyramid. There's physical, mental, emotional, and academic are all parts of what feeds a great leader. And all of the
Right.
pieces need to be fueled. But if we didn't, we needed that petri dish. We needed a place that we could show, like, imagine if you're a tennis player and Monica Seles and Novak Djokovic are actually speaking to you and inspiring you, what does that do to your grades? If you can relate what you're passionate about to your curriculum,
Right.
does that make you more engaged? What about the idea of starting your own nonprofit young, or starting a cause, or linking up in this way that we could actually follow it? So it was a big game changer for me.
Wow.
That was in
Wow. Well, it sounds
2000,
like you did follow your parents, both of their footsteps,
by
right?
accident, totally by accident.
Right?
I
You started a
merged the
nonprofit and a school, so you literally
two.
are like, in the family business. I mean, that's kinda crazy. So, I mean, it's been 20 years you've been doing this. I'm sure there's more than a few life lessons, but what do you think are some of the biggest life lessons you've learned on this journey?
It goes back to being mission driven, and the idea that when you inspire someone and someone gets inspired, you want to take action right away. But there's so much in between, and no one was really doing that. So I felt like, as a sports fan, as a superhero fan, that Batman always had a bat belt, right? A utility belt.
Right.
If students, if young people could have a utility belt, that they had the belief in themselves. They didn't have to look to others. They could be their own coaches. They could have their own utility belt. Um, that's what inspired me, was, again, these young leaders that had all the inspiration. They wanted to make an impact. And if we could
Right.
harness that and really be able to put up sort of guardrails, but let them try, fail, because we all know as adults that you learn from your failure. You absolutely learn from your failure.
100%.
It's so much better to fail young when things are
Right?
not on the line, and the failure is never a failure. It's usually the biggest motivator.
It's
So,
a lesson. It's a lesson and a motivator. It's exactly right. One of my sons got a D freshman year, and I don't know, I think it was in math or something. I said, "You wear that like a badge of honor. He goes like, "Are you doing reverse psychology? What's wrong with you? I'm never gonna go to college." I mean, and he's like, "I'm yelling at you. You should be yelling at me. What kind of mother are you?" And I said, "I'm a great mother because failure is the greatest gift I can give you. If you can fail and figure out how to fail well and pick yourself up, then I have taught you to survive."
and the tech world has actually taught us that if you look, I mean, there's one of our ICL champions is Tim Draper, who's a massive VC, eccentric, but he created a hall of heroes. And on that is all about failure, that
I love
failing
it.
led to the greatest inventions. I mean, people talk more about Michael Jordan getting cut from his sophomore basketball team than
Right?
any other story. I mean, that's sort of a first. So I feel like that's not within our normal education ethos, and the ICL Academy and the Institute for Civic Leadership, the results is leadership, and the results may be failure in your first project. In fact, majority it is. These kids are excited and it's hard, right? I mean, I
Right.
failed in a lot of things. I remember that pit in my stomach of getting a grant, working for a year on this service leadership and character curriculum that we tested out in the summer programs with a couple hundred kids. The results were just massive. We won a bunch of awards. And then when we multiply, we gave it to thousands of schools for free, and they just collected dust. So year one, it was a
Mm,
big binder. And I'm
right.
saying, this is for free. You get to do this and look at the results. No one used it. In year two, here's a CD-ROM. It's a digital. Put it in your computer. It's all free. You'll see the results. Nothing. And it kind of crushed me because I was like, but we raised millions of dollars. We show the results. You're there. This is transformative. So the mission
Right.
was always to transform education. It evolved, right? A lot of it was service leadership, finding a cause, whether it's the environment. It was going to be also showcasing at a high school level the fact that athletes are revered, SAT scores, but those kids who dedicated thousands of hours to a cause get no recognition. So part of it
Right.
was, how do we recognize those young leaders for what they're doing? And again, it's hard to quantify and qualify. I can tell you what I was ranked in the nation because you do it in
Right.
competition.
You know your stats,
Sure.
right?
It's a lot harder to do. So there've always been these sort of mini mission related things, but really when we started the incubator school, we just see the results. So, we have almost 700 students today that are part of the ICL Academy that's being funded by the foundation, and they are just exceptional. And in today's world, it's all about story. So when you ask kind of how things evolve, what I've realized is what keeps me going is the story. That these kids' stories are remarkable. And it starts with the mentors. Like, we're very lucky to have huge names. I mean, from the sports world, like, Olympic medalists like Bodie Miller or Kerry Walsh, Victor Zhao. I mean, from all walks, all disciplines, Maggie Steffens, water
But
polo.
it's a win-win, right? Because they get to give back in a way that's meaningful to them, to people that are also leaders that are leading. They want to see that investment too. You want your energy and time to be invested into something that you care about, where you can make a meaningful difference and move the needle, and you're doing that. So I mean, it's a win-win. It's not just hey, I'm going to attach this. There's 1.6 million of us nonprofits. So all those athletes are picking you for a reason. 1.6 million, right? That's a lot.
That's a staggering number. And I think
That's
that,
just the United States. That's just the United States. That's not even international. And
yeah.
so,
I learned a lot from Google, though. I think that the tech companies, the way
I
that
think
they
we
did
all
their,
have, maybe too much some days.
well, meeting with Google X and meeting with their foundation, and some of the biggest foundations says, look, you have to think different. You can't think like a traditional nonprofit. You have to think like a for-profit. You have to act like a for-profit. You need to tie in. You should have some for-profit elements somehow, because it almost legitimizes you. And so it really changed my perspective in this idea of the academy in transforming education, because the mission started to go more, the more sort of social it got, of entrepreneurship, service leadership. Those are all kind of airy words. Again, it's like you're
Right.
building it. But in the last 20 years, we saw the fundamental way kids are being educated from age 10 to 18 has had some real pitfalls, a lack of
Yep.
engagement, just people leaving, choosing to go to homeschools, choosing other options, saying, what's out there? What are we actually teaching? Tangible life skills. And there's a huge divide in public schools to private schools, like the cost, like free versus 40,
Oh,
50,
right. Right.
$60,000 a year. And there's nothing in between.
Right.
So we thought, wow, coming from a family that runs private schools, I see the benefits, but how can I use technology? I have a concept in education that we use at ICL that says respect tradition, but embrace tomorrow. So how do we
Nice.
use the best? I believe that teachers and mentors are still what motivates people. But
Right.
I think a great teacher and a great mentor is not just someone who makes a subject matter come alive to inspire you. It's also, on the flip side, someone that believes in you as an individual, that the world might not
100%.
see the potential in you. And that doesn't have to be in the same person. So at
Right.
ICL Academy, we started looking at how do we teach life skills? How do we get more engagement? How can kids apply things to the real world and things they're passionate about? So when you say what the next level, I mean, the big hairy goal in my lifetime is really
Right.
to help transform education which is usually antiquated. When you talk about healthcare and
God knows we need it, Kirk. We need your help.
so that's really what I've dedicated
I love that.
time and effort is to prove it, right? To use ICL Academy as a springboard to help these fellows, because once we have our fellows, the impact is so clear. I mean, I'll share a story about Luciana Perez, a really talented tennis player, but just a spark plug of a girl helping out her community in Peru, a Peruvian girl, very talented at tennis. But we all know that their skill set as a platform to something else. So she saw her tennis as being a way to give back to her community. She wrote a letter to the foundation. She was one of our fellows. And she said, I got the opportunity to get in the French Open. My dream is to go to US colleges, but Peru, it's really hard and not recognized. So the foundation just gave a small grant, allowed her to go to the French Open. She blows through the draw, gets to the finals of the French Open juniors,
Wow.
gets a full ride to college, becomes NCAA Player of the Year, wins sportsmanship awards. And it was such a small amount of money, but it completely
It
changed
changed
her
her life.
life. And now
Right.
she's an inspiration I mean, she's been on TV, she's linking it there. And then, you know, there's another amazing story of a family that ironically from South America, the Laguna Chavez brother, Roy Laguna Chavez, who grew up in a favela, and he wanted a grant to go to a leadership academy for ICL. And always, why do you want to be a leader? Why do you want to get this grant? He said that
Right.
my mother was misdiagnosed by a doctor in our favela and she died. And I never want another child to die from being misdiagnosed from poor. So I want to dedicate myself to become a doctor here in my favela, in my community. And then what he wrote, what do you do now to support your community? He lived above a trash, like basically lived in trash. He would build instruments and teach all the orphans and kids
Oh,
how to
wow.
play music. And, again, we're talking about $1,000 grant, changes life
Right.
forever. So today, that was in 2009. He's a full-blown doctor at the favela, and he goes back and says that moment that ICL changed my life forever. And
Right.
without that, there were no other organizations to look at that ever could have done something like that. So there are many, many, many more stories about our fellows, but
Kirk, I love this. And, we say all the time at Task, at my leadership nonprofit, you cannot lead unless you serve. You
Mhm.
cannot lead unless you serve. And these stories of service and leadership have filled my heart, fired me up, made me want to go back to the email box and get to work and roll up my sleeves. But you're speaking my language. And I think it's so important that people get to hear your journey as a leader, as a mentor, and as someone who, because real leaders develop other leaders. That's what we're here for. And that's what we keep doing, right? Generation after generation, leader after leader, we're planting a crop. And if we're not there planting the seeds with everybody else who's a, a recipient of what our work, then where's the next crop going to come from? And so that's what we're doing. I keep saying to everyone, I'm just a farmer. I'm just planting seeds. That's all I'm doing, is just planting seeds. And someone else
Mm.
can harvest, but I'm just planting seeds of the next generation. And I think that that's what you and I both are privileged enough to do. And I'm so grateful for you. So tell us how we can share, how we can donate, how we can get involved with ICL.
Sure. The ICL Foundation has, we try to keep it that rule of threes, right? There are ways to support, and everyone likes to support in their own distinct ways. Some, they can be the first and foremost is supporting our fellows program, and we have an opportunity to create scholarships which support education, training, travel for these kids that are exceptional, that cannot find that anywhere else. And it's required that they then give back. So every time a grant is given to a fellow, they have responsibilities to impact a minimum of 10 other people in the same way. It's been phenomenal. On a high level, we're looking at how to utilize technology. We said respect tradition, embrace tomorrow. Looking at the character building, if I had a sort of Venn diagram as a parent, what's important? There's academics, there's your passion pursuits, whether it be sports or something that you're into. But the biggest one is your character. You want happy, healthy kids of good character. And to that way, there is a mental health crisis in youth today. And I really think that ICL, there's no silver bullet to it. There's not one, it's not definitely not in a pill form. And it's really going to be about teaching kids to be their own. One of our partners and mentors, Dr. Jim Lair, who's written 17 books, we teach a lot of leading with character, the power of story. He calls it Yoda. And kids like to hear about Yoda, but it's not the Yoda we think of. It stands for your own decision advisor, how you can help kids become their own advisors. To me, that then literally eats away at that mental health crisis, because so much of it comes, we know the reasons, right? We all, have read the books of the Coddling the American Mind. We know about the anxious generation. We know it's real. We see it all in front of us. And the ICL Foundation on a high level wants to help really instill in kids using supportive AI. We can have mentorship, things where kids are not afraid to ask them, their parents, their coaches. A lot what Sal Khan is doing with Conmigo, we would like to sort of work on a program to help that social emotional side, where you could ask, if your sport is tennis, Novak Djokovic, hey, I get nervous. What do you do? Hey, I do too. And right away you have that companion, that mentorship.
Right. I
And
love
that's
that.
really it's about sort of master classes, like giving away for free the knowledge from exceptional people, what their journeys have been, to show kids that there is a pathway. And right now that's hard to find. I mean, you
Right.
just see little
100%.
snippets. So we kind of have the idea where we're lucky enough to have, you know, 50 to 100, I mean, world caliber Olympians, titans of business, global icons. They're willing to share their journeys. We want to be able to raise funds to be able to sort of, we all know that this generation, it's all about sound bites. You can't have things more than sort of a couple minutes.
Right. Right.
Work on having that. So our three initiatives are that. So the ICL Foundation is really trying to redefine, character and service leadership and in schools, in our programs, and to support our fellows that are really changing the world. And the results are kind of amazing.
Well, I get called occasionally the leader of the leaders in my little small pond of the world. So you are definitely the leader of the leaders, Kirk, for sure. You win the title, you get the crown. Tell us where we can find you on Instagram, your website, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so the ICLfoundation.org is our website, and we do a lot of mentorship on YouTube. We have all of our mentors available. You can see what we do. Um, every dollar that comes in goes directly to support one of these three initiatives. We are incredibly nimble, very low overhead. We don't believe in a lot of baggage. I mean, people are very mission driven, so we're able to kind of counter our funding. We have a lot of matching grants, but we just want to grow. When you're younger, 20 years ago, you think it's all going to happen really fast, like a rocket ship. I realize that it is a slow and steady winning the race.
That's
We
the
want
way it
to
goes.
be our goal for next year. We'd love to be able to have in our incubator academy, get up to 2,000 students. Once you're at 2,000, you can really create a base to then go to a bigger audience. The end goal is this needs to be part of our education system as a whole.
So exciting. It's all so good. I love everything you're saying. It's like I found someone who speaks my language, Kirk. So I'm really, what a joy it has been learning about you, your journey, your incredible work, and how important it is to invest in young leaders. Because when kids start caring about other people and thinking beyond themselves, they don't have mental health crises. It shifts everything. It changes it all, and you are doing brilliant work. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for everyone that listens. I mean, just even listening to something like this is the first step to have that interest, to be able to get involved. And, I thank all your listeners for doing that, because it's what you're doing is so important. To use a platform to tell stories and to get the word out. So more thanks to you and the listeners.
Thank Thanks, Kirk. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to our guest, Kirk Spahn, about what it takes to start a business that truly changes people's lives. I think his comment about latching on to something bigger than yourself was so inspiring and true. To learn more about these modern-day heroes and entrepreneurs, reach out to us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love it if you shared it with your family and friends. And please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. But more than that, thank you for caring, for believing in goodness, and for being a part of our movement to change the world for good. You are exactly what the world needs more of. Remember that together we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. Charity matters.